Sit! Welcome to the Dynasty Nerds Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss Dynasty strategy, rankings, and all things NFL. So get ready to geek out on fantasy football with your host, Rich Dotson.
Welcome back to the Dynasty Nerds Podcast. No Rich Dotson today. He is off tanning those beautiful feet of his in sunny Florida and practicing his Dynasty Hot Boy Summer. So it's just myself, Garret Price, and the better looking of this duo, Matt O'Hara. How's it going?
Hey, buddy. How you doing, man? I thought for sure you were going to say he was tanning his buns, but the feet, I think, makes more sense.
He's probably more proud of his feet than he is anything else.
I agree. Totally.
Although it wouldn't surprise me if he was tanning his buns too. Like, that's a real possibility.
Like, accidentally, though. Like,
that sounds fair. That sounds fair. But yeah, so no Rich Dotson this week for this show or the Nerd Herd show. But we will have him back next week on our buys and sells episode. But this week is our wide receivers. That's right, those guys catching the ball for your fantasy football teams. We've got the buys on this episode. And obviously, Rich Dotson being our fearless leader, he does a good job of taking a lot of time and explaining things on the show. Without him here, without his presence, it might be a tad bit shorter. Just a tad bit shorter with just Matt and I.
I mean, I think you're trying to say nicely that he is a little long-winded, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it right what you're talking about, man. And we all know it.
I mean, look, if you read the YouTube comments, Rich is either the reason you listen to the show or the reason you hate the show. There is no in between. Like, that, it is what it is.
True statement.
Yep.
Love you, Rich. Love you, Rich. I'm on the love side, obviously.
Oh, 100%. Team Rich. Dynasty Hot Boy Summer. For sure. All right. Well, let's get into it. Matt, why don't you give us your first Dynasty buy at the wide receiver position?
All right. So my number one buy here is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Currently coming off the board of an ADP of 33, right around wide receiver 25 off the board. So I must have been looking at one QB for that to be kind of synced up there. But last year he's coming off a season where he was wide receiver 45 last year. So I think, I think while we all like everyone expected big things out of him, I think here the two of us at least kind of saw him more of a slow burn, kind of maybe a slow starter just due to the circumstances there in Seattle. And while he's one of these people that has the lowest vacated targets, he has 0. Like the wide receiver position did not change at all there in Seattle. I do think he has a shot to up his targets. And when you dig in a little bit, obviously the two guys that are there that are kind of gobbling up stuff is DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, both of which I thought was really interesting. I dug into their contracts, and you know how I love my contract talk.
That's right, baby.
So DK Metcalf this year is counting $24.5 million against the cap, but next year that goes up to 29.5. And Tyler Lockett is right around, he's right under, like a hair under 19 million per year, but that number goes way up next year. It's up above 30 million next year. So between the two of them, you're looking at about $60 million worth of cap space next year. And if I'm Seattle, personally, I appreciate everything Tyler Lockett has done, and this is a whole new coaching staff, right? So there's no real ties to any of these guys, especially DK Metcalf, who I think Pete Carroll kind of knew how to manage some of his emotional issues. Just nothing big, but he has occasional blow-ups. I think defenders know how to get under his skin. I think Pete Carroll did a pretty good job of kind of managing that and helping him suppress that. This is a whole new coaching staff, and they have this year to kind of figure out, hey, is DK Metcalf worth almost $30 million? I can, it's all, take it to the bank that Tyler Lockett's not going to be worth $30 million. I think no matter what, like he's a cut candidate at the end of the year. But DK Metcalf, is also a cut candidate because his dead money goes way down to 11 million. Right now it's at 36 with a $24 million cap hit. So there's no way they're going to get rid of him this year. But next year that flips on its head. It's $29 million of against the cap and only 11.5 of dead money. And Tyler Lockett, the same thing. His dead money drops off to it's like $4 million. So the Tyler Lockett decision is going to be easy. But that brings me to this year. I think, combine the fact that the financials kind of are working against both those older wide receivers or both the other wide receivers, and the fact that Jaxon Smith-Njigba, he is the best separator of all of them. If you look at the target separation numbers, DK Metcalf is 1.34 yards, of target separation. And Tyler Lockett is at 1.59. Jaxon Smith-Njigba is way up at 2.32 yards per target. So he just is getting better separation. He's a more quarterback friendly type of guy. And I think he's more of a chain mover. He's not a big play guy necessarily down the field. So I think when he gets the targets, I think they're gonna need him to get targets this year to kind of move things along. And by next year, I think he's really going to eat because Geno Smith is likely on his last leg there if he doesn't show probably this new coaching staff something pretty big. And a wide receiver like Jaxon Smith-Njigba that can get open close to the line of scrimmage and in the intermediate routes and has a lot of separation is a nice target monster and a nice safety blanket for any sort of young quarterback that they're going to bring in, whether that's Sam Howell or they bring in another guy next year. So I just think right now this is probably his lowest that his ADP is going to be, and it's only going to rise from here. So this is the classic. Rich talks about it all the time. Kind of like a little bit of an overpay right now is going to be an underpay next year, and that's why he's a buy for me. It's not that you're going to get him super cheap because he's only 1 year removed from being a first round draft pick, but I think next year this time it's going to be pricier. So I think this is kind of the time to buy him because there's a little bit of a dip because there's a little bit of uncertainty because there's just two good wide receivers there. Maybe the offense isn't as enticing because it's going to be a little bit more run friendly or run heavy. I mean, so all that combined, I think makes him a buy for me because I love the talent. I always have.
No, I'm with you. As far as nerd score, he was the top guy in his class. I think he still ranks top 10 for me all time, nerd score wise. If not, he's just right outside at like 11 or 12 over the past 5 years. So very, very talented player. And you're right. Long term, these guys, especially Tyler Lockett, it's just not even a conversation point. Like he will be gone. And we're going to see a heavier role. But for me, I think one thing that even helps this along a little bit for me is every year under Pete Carroll, the Seattle Seahawks were one of the most run-heavy teams in football every single year. And it's why I'm off Kenneth Walker a little bit because there's nowhere for them to go but more pass happy. Like you can't get more run centric than they were. And you look at their new offensive coordinator. He was the former offensive coordinator for the Washington Huskies, a guy that liked to open it up and throw the ball downfield. So I do think that we see this offense pass a little bit more this year. I do think that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is involved a little bit more this year. And so if he's, cutting into everyone else's targets, let's say it was the same amount of opportunities, but he's taking maybe 5 to 8% of the targets that they were getting. And then you add in it's a more pass happy offense. Those two things together, all of a sudden we could see him go from wide receiver 45 to mid to late 20s.
Absolutely. And DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett each got 120 targets last year, 120 plus. I think Lockett got 122. And Jaxon Smith-Njigba had 93, so it was a respectable amount. But I would expect that to kind of tip and flip on its head, especially between him and Lockett. I feel like a 31-year-old guy who is going to be turning 32 later on in the season. I just don't know why a new coaching staff would hang on and kind of make him a centerpiece in it all. I mean, he's a good player still, but he's not the player he was. So I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is the ascending player while Tyler Lockett is the guy that's kind of on the decline. And I would expect that to kind of flip on its head or even out at least just because you want to see what you got on the young guy. I mean, he was a first-round draft pick for a reason. He's really talented.
No, that makes perfect sense. With that, just a quick question. Is he more of a buy for you on just what you think is going to be happening, or is he a buy over some of the guys like that are in the same price range as him? And let me, of course, as soon as I say that, now I lost my spot as to where he was in all of this.
So
there he
I
is.
got it. There's
okay, go ahead.
There's T. Higgins, there's Rashid Rice. Those guys are right ahead of him. DK Metcalf's 3 spots ahead of him. And then right behind him, it's Jordan Addison, Xavier Worthy, Lad McConkey, and then like Deebo Samuel. So even right above DK Metcalf is a guy like Tank Dell, Zay Flowers. I mean, I would much rather have Jaxon Smith-Njigba than any of those guys. So yeah, he just seeing the guys that are going around him. If I could trade any of those guys 1-for-1 for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, I would. I mean, Rashid Rice had a great situation, and he's doing a pretty good job of messing it up. Why he's still going ahead of a guy like Jaxon Smith-Njigba right now, it's got to be on the fact that people think he's just going to slide right back into the same role. And he very well could, but that's a little bit more risk than I would like to take on. I would just go with the Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who I had as a better player, period. You know what I mean? And I think his situation is going to be much better a year from now, and even this season, but especially a year from now, I think his ADP is going to be a lot higher than it was.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes perfect sense. All right. So for me, my first buy is Terry McLaurin. So you got to go down the ADP list a little bit further for good old Terry McLaurin. He's getting up there in years. He's not this young whippersnapper anymore. This is going to be I believe it's his age 30 season. I'll double check that, but I believe it's his age. It's either 29 or 30, so not a young pup anymore. But here's the thing: we get a new system, a new quarterback in Washington now. We get Jaden Daniels, and what did Jaden Daniels do extremely, extremely well? It was get the ball downfield to big play wide receivers. That's why Brian Thomas was so successful, was because there was really good deep ball accuracy on Jaden Daniels' throws. Well, who's the guy that's going to be able to make use of a lot of those big-time plays is Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin has traditionally just been that really safe, low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 for your dynasty teams. He's never really had that breakout season where it's like, oh my goodness, he was wide receiver 7 this year. Like, that was awesome. He's just that season never came, which was always a bummer. But he's never had a year where you were like, man, Terry McLaurin sucked this year. He's always healthy. He's always consistent. He's always there. And just because he is getting a little older, Matt, did you see how old he was? Is this age 30 season?
No. So he's 28 right now. He's 28 now. He'll be 29 at the end of September or middle of September.
Even better. So it's age 29 season. Makes me feel even better about this. So right now, according to our ADP, in Superflex tight end premium, he is going as the 92nd player off the board. And wide receiver wise, he's wide receiver 40 off the board. Now, I get it. He's a little bit older, but as much as I want to look ahead and I want to have guys that can help me in 4, 5, 6 years, I think sometimes in Dynasty, we are a little too forward thinking, a little too forward focused. If you look at your team 3 years ago compared to what your team looks like now, you're going to see a drastically different team. Even just 1 year, it looks drastically different. You give it 3 years, your teams look drastically different. And I think this is one of those scenarios where we've gotten a little too forward thinking on Terry McLaurin and not really given a good consideration to what we could get out of him for the next 2 to 3 years. And the thing that even helps me with this even more is we just have to look at as recently as last year. We had 3 rookie quarterbacks come in. Now, the first one, obvious. CJ Stroud, he came in, was a stud. Easy for me to say, we're going to get the same thing out of Nico Collins. We're going to get that out of Terry McLaurin this year. Okay, well, not all quarterbacks have the CJ Stroud rookie season, But we can look at the other two quarterbacks as well. In his limited time, Michael Pittman Jr. was improved and was better with Anthony Richardson compared to what they had before. And even Bryce Young, yes, Bryce Young, who had a putrid rookie season. Look at what Adam Thielen did last year. The number one receiver, who's well past his prime, way more so than Terry McLaurin, had a really good season. In fact, for most of the year, he was a wide receiver 1 last year. Now, he dipped below that at the end of the season, but for most of the year, he was a wide receiver 1 for the Carolina Panthers last year. So I say all that to say, I think this breathes new life into the organization. I think this breathes new life into a guy that all we ever – actually, I shouldn't say all we ever hear, because we hear nothing about Terry McLaurin. All this guy does is work, shuts his mouth, and gets stuff done. And I think behind the scenes – this could be the season for Terry McLaurin where we see that breakout year. Now, I'm not saying book it, wide receiver 7. But if he ends up being wide receiver 19 this year, 18 this year, it would not surprise me in the least.
No, and he's a very consistent player. You mentioned that, you alluded to it. But every year he's been above 1,000 yards except for his rookie season. So I do think he flies under the radar for the kind of production and consistency that he's had, and that's something I personally value in my products or my any wide receivers that I have on my team. They're just, you want to be able to rely on a player when you put him in your lineup. You know what you're going to get, and Terry McLaurin right now, he's a guy that you feel really good putting in your wide receiver 3 position, and that was with maybe less desirable quarterback. So I agree with you that I think if it's not instant this year, it's going to be coming this year, towards the end of this year when your playoffs are happening, and then into next year. So even if Jaden Daniels doesn't hit the ground running immediately, I still think it's wheels up for Terry. I think he's going to have a nice year.
Hey, Dynasty Nerds, it's time to take your Dynasty game to the next level with FFPC's Dynasty Startup Leagues. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, FFPC has a league for you, with entry fees ranging from $100 up to $5,000. Choose from a variety of formats, including Superflex, Best Ball Superflex, Triflex, 1QB, and Standard. With weekly lineups, waivers, trades, head-to-head matchups, and playoffs, FFPC's fully managed leagues provide the ultimate dynasty experience. Most importantly, the leagues are here to stay. FFPC has never had a dynasty league fold. They manage the entire commissioner experience from buy-in management to fulfilling your orphans. FFPC is perfect place to expand your dynasty league portfolio. And here's the best part. As a Dynasty Nerds listener, you can get $25 off any entry fee as a new member when you use the promo code NERDS. Head over to myffpc.com now to draft your team, manage your roster, and dominate your league with FFPC. That's myffpc.com. Promo code NERDS for $25 off any entry fee for new members. FFPC, where dynasty dreams become a reality.
Awesome. All right, Matt, who's your next guy?
All right. Speaking of wheels up, on guys that can fly, my next guy is Rashid Shaheed. Currently going off with an ADP of 157. So this guy's, you're getting him late. It's the 14th round, basically. I do want to make a quick correction. I said on my last one, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, that his ADP was 33 and he was wide receiver 25, and I was really confused about that in my brain. I just double checked it. His ADP is actually 68.5, so it's like 69ish, which makes more sense. I must have just forgot to update his actual ADP number. But anyway, Rashid Shaheed, another guy who's coming in. Jaxon Smith-Njigba was wide receiver 45. Rashid Shaheed last year was wide receiver 47 on the year, despite missing a game and putting up a 0 in another game, which was kind of the week after he was injured. So I think he was still a little dinged up. But unlike Terry, unlike Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Rashid Shaheed actually has some vacated targets there at the wide receiver position. 85 targets vacated from last season, just from the wide receiver position. Most of that coming from Michael Thomas leaving. He had 64 targets. which was the 11th most. I mean, so it's a pretty decent amount. They didn't do anything in the offseason to add anybody of note. Towards the end of last year, it was basically A.T. Perry was kind of stepping up and doing some things. So I did want to mention him as another possible guy that is flying way under the radar as well. But Shaheed has shown me what he could do. He had over 700 yards last year, kind of as a ancillary, secondary kind of piece in that offense. And kind of towards the end of the season, he did a little bit more. But he ended up tied with Chris Olave for the most targets. I mean, the most touchdown catches, and he had the second most receiving yards on the team. So I expect him to be one of these guys that benefits from the vacated targets and is going to see a bump this year. And obviously, if you've watched Rashid Shaheed play, this guy's a big play waiting to happen at basically any time. He's got a crazy if you're into air yards, he's got a crazy air yards per reception, 23.8 air yards per reception, which is good for 10th in the whole entire NFL. And obviously, I already mentioned the 5 touchdowns, and a lot of the times these deep threat guys, they're inconsistent with their hands. He also has great hands. He has a 93.9% true catch rate, which is, catches basically it calculates catches on catchable targets, not just all your targets.
Sure.
So it's a true catch rate, and he only had 1 drop on 75 targets. So while I think there is going to be some built-in down weeks with a guy like him, because he does get downfield quite a bit, and sometimes he'll just miss on throws. It won't be his fault because the hands are there, everything is there. But I do expect him to be a little bit more consistent, because I just think he's going to get more targets. I think there's more to him than just a deep threat. He can do things on jet sweeps. He can do things close to the line of scrimmage and turn them into something. And I think we're going to get a chance to see him kind of take that next step. So Rashid Shaheed, a guy 25 years old, he'll be 26 during the season, but young enough that you're going to get, 4 or 5 years out of this guy. Possibly that would be like the top end. But 157, like, you're not giving up much for a guy like Rashid. I can't say his name now. Rashid Shaheed.
I love him so much. I just don't know how to say his name.
I've just been talking too much. I'm exhausted. So the words aren't coming out correctly. But I love this guy as just kind of a throwing piece. That's what I saw him as too. When I went and looked at him in the trade calculator, he was always just a piece of a bigger thing. It was never like him as a centerpiece of anything. And I think if you're making moves this year and you're looking for a little cherry on top, I think Rashid Shaheed is a nice little piece. If that's a player that's on the roster you're trying to get a guy from.
He is a really interesting piece, and I think you're right. The vacated targets, I'm a big targets are earned guy, but with them not really adding anyone of note and Michael Thomas being gone, they do have to go somewhere. And I think obviously Chris Olave will be the main guy that gets the targets, but you could still only funnel so many targets to one guy. So they do have to go somewhere else, and he's a logical fit for them to go his way. He is in a really interesting range ADP wise, where it's like pick your flyer. Like, there's so many really fun flyers around his range ADP wise. So some guys literally right behind him. So you got Rashid Shaheed, and you got Quentin Johnston, Khalil Shakir, and then a few spots down, you've got some rookies like Jermaine Burton. Then you got a Gabe Davis, a Mike Williams. There's just a lot of really interesting upside flyers. So the $1 million question though, Matt, Mike Williams or Rashid Shaheed?
Listen, I love Mike Williams and always will, but I think his better days are behind him. And I think Shaheed's his better days might be ahead of him. So I would probably go Shaheed here, just because I think it's the prudent long-term move. Although my love for Mike Williams is undying.
Absolutely. So needless to say, you probably like Shaheed better than everyone in that range. Shakir, Quentin Johnston, all those guys. You like Shaheed better?
listen, I think Khalil Shakir has a really nice opportunity ahead of him, and I actually left him as a guy I wasn't gonna put down as my buy because I thought for sure you
Thinking
were gonna take him. Yeah, so I was like,
I thought about him.
I was like, I'm gonna hands off Garrett's boy here, but you did not pick him. So yeah, I do. I think I would probably take Shakir ahead of him just because he has a great opportunity ahead of him, and he showed out. He showed me more than I thought he had in him towards the end of last season. So I really do like his opportunity there better.
He does have a good opportunity where it's a team without a true wide receiver one at this point. We'll see if Keon Coleman can maybe develop into that. But right now it's kind of wide open for anybody to take that role. So will be pretty interesting to see how that whole situation ends up playing out. Anything else on Shaheed before we move on to our final guy?
No, I think that's it, man. Just exciting player. AstroTurf, that dude can fly, man. Go get him and have some fun. You know what I mean? Like, this is a guy that you said it. Like, he's in a range where you can get him to kind of be a fourth or fifth guy on your team, on your wide receiver on your roster, and see what happens, man. Because I really do think he's got a pretty nice opportunity there in New Orleans.
Well, and an awesome like best ball type of guy too.
Oh, for sure.
Especially like we don't talk best ball necessarily, but he's one of those guys that can just have monster weeks out of nowhere where you're like, oh, he just put up 90 yards on 3 catches and 2 touchdowns. You're like, dang, that's awesome out of my wide receiver 5, 6 on my team. Like, thank you very much. So absolutely there.
Hey guys, let me tell you about our friends at Sleeper. Guess what? Our app the mini is live on Sleeper right now. The Dynasty GM, you can use the analyzer, you can use the trade calculator, and my favorite thing is the inbox, right? Where all your trades from all your Sleeper leagues are right there. You can actually push trades through the actual Sleeper app. And right now, we couldn't be more excited to be partners with them. And right now, if you don't know, they are doing DFS. And I know how many people that play Dynasty play DFS as well. And right now, there's not a better place to play DFS than Sleeper. They're offering up to 100 times your entry, the highest payout in the whole DFS market right now. You can track your fantasy players and your Sleeper picks in real time. All you got to do is choose 2 to 8 of your favorite players from pregame, live in-game, or even across different sports. Pick more or less than the predicted stats, and only on Sleeper you can get up to 100 times your payout. You can share with your friends and get rewarded together. Make sure you use that promo code NERD so our friends know that friends sent them their way. And get your deposit match and have a good time. You'll have all your DFS, all of your fantasy leagues, and now even a Dynasty GM in one spot. It is fully operational inside Sleeper right now. And then when you're a Nerd Herd member, you get that full access to that. And remember, you also want to download the Dynasty Nerds app because they're both in there. Check it out. Check our friend Sleeper. Check out our DFS. Use that promo code NERDS.
Get your whole estate.
All right, last one. This guy felt like, even though they're very different stylistically, this guy felt very similar to my other buy. And I'm going after Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley is now a member of the Tennessee Titans. And he is going to be, he's 29 years old. This will be his age 29 season. He does turn 30 in December. So I don't know if they'll count that as his, I would assume it'd be his age 29 season since he starts as that and it's most of the season. But I'm not quite sure how they calculate that.
Me neither. It probably is, though.
So another guy that's 29 years old, that means you're going to get him for probably another 2 to 3 seasons. He has an opportunity on a team like the Tennessee Titans that I think is really, really interesting. They have a new head coach, and their head coach was the former offensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati Bengals had an amazing passing attack. Now, it helps when you have a guy like Joe Burrow leading that passing attack, and it helps when you have wide receivers like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins.
You can't overstate that, how important that is.
It makes bad offensive coordinators look good. But I do think he was a good offensive coordinator. I do think he was a good offensive mind. I think he put his players in positions to succeed and helped the Bengals kind of overachieve When they went to the Super Bowl a couple years ago, it was a much quicker ascension than I think a lot of people thought was possible for that team. So Callahan talked about Calvin Ridley, though, and bringing him in and how much they wanted to do that and how they weren't even sure that was a possibility. And they're releasing videos on how wild they thought it was, that they didn't even think they were going to get an opportunity to get him, and they were able to, and they're able to get the deal done. And he started talking about how he wants to use Calvin in a similar role to how they use Jamar Chase, which instantly made me listen a little bit more, because I initially assumed that if you were going to have somebody in the Jamar Chase role, that which traditionally was an X, but also lined up a surprising amount early on in the slot too. And so that's what's interesting for me about Calvin Ridley is if in Brian Callahan's mind, Calvin Ridley is going to be the best version that they have of Jamar Chase, at the very least, that tells me there's a lot of targets coming his way. And right now, ADP-wise, he's coming off the board as the 48th wide receiver in Superflex tight end premium. ADP-wise, that puts him around 122. Now, comparing that to the Underdog, which obviously is more of a redraft mentality, wide receiver 36 on Underdog, which still feels kind of low on a season long, but there's a 12-spot disparity there on a guy that I still think has 2 to 3 years left in him. And at that price point, it is really, really difficult to get anyone that has any hope of being anywhere close to a wide receiver one. And just for what it's worth, Calvin Ridley, in what most people said was like a kind of disappointing year last year with the Jacksonville Jaguars, he actually was like surprisingly okay. He was wide receiver 18 on the season. Not like, that's amazing. Right. But at that price, give me wide receiver 24 and I'll be thrilled. So I think that's the thing with both Ridley and McLaurin for me is they're guys that they have proven that they can get it done. They are players that have both went on the field at the very least, been very reliable pretty much season in, season out, and both have opportunities to have better roles with better systems than they've had in the past. So, at that price point, I'm just going to gobble up Calvin Ridley all day long. Looking at his ADP, like I just mentioned, right now he's the 122nd player off the board. Some guys in his range. Don't get me wrong, I like some of these players, but if I'm a contender,
I was about to go down the list with you.
Go ahead. Do it.
All right, no. So I'm looking right at the ADP, and there's no way I'm taking. Well, Xavier Legette is ahead of him, so never mind. No one's taking Xavier Legette after him. But guys right ahead of him that I'm kind of questioning. Would you rather have Marquise Brown or Calvin Ridley? For me, it's probably
I'd rather have Calvin Ridley.
I'd rather have Ridley. Keenan Allen, you probably got 2 years with each of these guys, maybe, right?
He's a tough one for me. I think I would probably go Ridley simply because there seems to be a clear path for him to be the wide receiver one on the team than there seems to be for Keenan Allen. He seems pretty locked into that wide receiver 2 next to DJ Moore that could end up being wide receiver 3 by the end of the season, depending on how Odunze does.
How many times have we said that about Keenan Allen over the course of his career?
But how many times has he been a Chicago Bear?
Oh, wow, Burr. This is a new Bears team, all right?
That's true. That's true.
They have a whole new outfit there. Number one pick. He's amazing. He's going to turn everything around. Stop it.
I hope he does.
Back to the list. Adonai Mitchell is directly ahead of him. I would take Adonai Mitchell. Just crazy upside. That's me.
I would too. In a startup. But if I'm a contender, it's easily Calvin Ridley for me. So it kind of just depends on where I'm at. Middle of the road, rebuild, Adonai easily, contender
Sure.
Calvin Ridley.
So, I mean, same question for a guy right below him. Jameson Williams is, I think, an interesting guy and a kind of a good situation with vacated targets and all that kind of stuff from last year. And I think he's going to have a larger role this coming season. Would you rather have the 24-year-old Jameson Williams or the 29-year-old Calvin Ridley?
For me, it would be Ridley. I was always a little bit lower on Jameson Williams than consensus. And while I do think you're not incorrect, I do think there's a chance for an increased role this year. He's never going to get more targets than Amon-Ra St. Brown.
True.
And more than likely never more than Sam Laporta either. So he's always going to be at best third fiddle on a team that really does like to run the football too. So that's the hard part for me is I think this would be different maybe in best ball, but in season-long leagues, I just don't know when to start him until he becomes more consistent. I feel like he's always going to be the guy that like I'm wondering if I should start him this week or not.
I get that. Josh Reynolds leaving, I think, is a pretty big plus. They need somebody else in that offense to do something because Josh Reynolds, I mean, he was never amazing, but he was just like good enough to be annoying to somebody that wanted to see Jameson Williams get more targets.
Sure,
so I'm glad to
sure.
see him kind of get out of Detroit and kind of clear the path, I think, a little bit for Jameson Williams. And the fact that they didn't do anything major at the position makes me think that this is kind of the year for him to get an opportunity at least to step up and do more in the offense. So me personally, I would take that shot on a 24-year-old Jameson Williams over a guy like Calvin Ridley, who to me, so counterpoints all the points that you were kind of making about the offense and all that kind of stuff. DeAndre Hopkins, I mean, he's older than Calvin Ridley, but he isn't going away and he's still pretty talented. And Will Levis, I mean, hopefully he takes a step, but now you're saying, I hate starting a sentence with hopefully, you know what I mean? When you're talking about a quarterback and like needing to rely on that guy to feed multiple targets in an offense, you know, they have Tyler Boyd there as well, who's likely going to just slide into the exact same role he had with Cincinnati, which is, you know, you're moving the chains, you're kind of run blocking quite a bit. He knows the offense, all that kind of good stuff. He's not really a fantasy factor, but he's another guy that's just kind of annoying to the other players on the team that you want to see just kind of get all the targets. He's just good enough to be annoying. So me, I personally would rather just go with Jameson Williams than kind of deal with some of the stuff that I'm not sure about in Tennessee. Like we've seen Nathaniel Hackett get a head coaching job because of a guy like Aaron Rodgers, and we don't know what the heck to expect. I mean, I think Callahan is going to be good there, but I don't know. And if it's disastrous, you know, you're buying a 29-year-old guy that you can't get out from underneath at all. And at least with Jameson Williams, you know, he's young enough that maybe he gets a second chance on a team, on a different team that wants to feature him.
Definitely a possibility. I would just rather have a guy that I've actually seen do it versus a guy that I hope maybe one day can do it as the third wide receiver.
I get it. And both of us are hoping for something. We're just hoping for different things. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to hang my hat on the younger guy who
would it matter for you, contender, not contender? Would that matter or no?
It should. It should, but I'm not sure it would. I think I might just go either way with Jameson Williams.
You're just a Jameson diehard, and I respect that.
I absolutely am. So that's kind of where I'm feeling that one. And Calvin Ridley, I've always kind of not been a Calvin Ridley guy. I liked him coming out, and then all the goofy stuff that happened, it kind of pushed me off of him a bit when he kind of basically quit on football and then came back and then got suspended for gambling, all that kind of good stuff. Like it was just with Jameson Williams, it's just the one suspension for gambling. So
Exactly.
He's got so much time for me to hate him later. If
Right.
He does more
He can
dumb
still
things.
quit football. You know, he hasn't done that yet. All right. Well, that wraps up the bye episode. But you know what? Just wait a day. Or maybe if you're late to this, wait like a few seconds. And you can head on over and get our sell episode where Matt and I have maybe some guys that were our buys might even tie into some of our sells. Maybe. I'm not saying for sure.
Maybe. I mean,
but maybe
it could be somebody.
Specifically Matt. It might, but maybe not.
It might. We'll see.
All right, so tune back in, and we will be back with that episode. And then next week, we will be back with the one and only Rich Dotson.
Teaser. Adios.
Let me tell you what's going down at Underdog Fantasy. Guys, it is time for Best Ball Mania 5. Don't miss out on the huge $1.5 million first place prize for only a $25 entry. This year, Best Ball Mania 5 will pay out $15 million in total prize money. Download the Underdog Fantasy app and deposit at least $10 using promo code NERDS. Underdog will match your first deposit up to $100. So that means if you put in 20, they'll put in 20. You put in 50, they'll put in 50, all the way up to $100. Test your skills against the best and try to win that $1.5 million first place prize at Best Ball Mania. Don't forget, use promo code NERDS at Underdog Fantasy.